So my heresy is that the ideas which underpin our system of social provision today are not fit for purpose. They drive unhelpful behaviours and can result in a service delivery system which, at its worst, can be part of the problem rather than part of the solution. My thesis is that in social provision, we've borrowed ideas from other disciplines, such as medicine and economics. These ideas might work well in their field of origin, but applied to the very different and very complex world of social provision, they can steer delivery off course. We need to stop borrowing from elsewhere and base our service system on what we know about human beings and what we all need to thrive, the human sciences. So that's the punchline, and I'm going to flesh that out later. But first of all, I'm going to give you the story that led to this thesis, the story of the outcome star, as Rob was mentioning. So if you're sitting comfortably, I will begin. So the original outcome star was developed for the homelessness sector, and it came about as the result of a collaboration between myself and two other women. We all had a background in the voluntary sector and in consultancy, and we all had an interest in personal and spiritual growth. Buddhism, neuro-linguistic programming, and psychotherapy were some of our influences. We came together for the pleasure of working together and to learn from and support each other. Once we joined forces, we discovered that we'd all attended a talk by an academic and consultant called Jean Bolton. Some of you may have come across her. She's been around talking about complexity for a long time. And that her talk focused on complexity theory and its implications for management. And we were all so taken with it that we had all independently contacted her to arrange to go and see her in Bath. That talk gave me the missing piece in something that I'd been puzzling over. I'd been training charity chief executives in strategic planning using an off-the-shelf course created by colleagues. But after a couple of goes, I had to pull out of delivering the course because I just didn't believe the theory that I was teaching, that the world was so predictable and stable that chief executives could analyse their environment and put in place concrete plans 5 years into the future. Complexity theory provided me with an alternative framing, that chief executives needed to build organisational capacity for responding to an unpredictable world rather than concrete plans which extended years into the future. So these were some of the influences that drew the three of us together: a view of the world as complex and therefore needing a responsive learning approach, really valuing collaboration, and a belief in everyone's potential for growth. So that was, I think of that as the soil out of which the outcome star grew. The context in which the outcome star came into being was the rise of new public management, and with it the requirement on organisations to measure and demonstrate their outcomes. The London Housing Foundation is a grant-making trust for service providers working with homeless people in London. They saw this change in public management coming before it was a reality on the ground and wanted to equip the homelessness sector to respond. They wanted service providers to be on the front foot, defining their own outcomes rather than having measures imposed on them. So they created an Impact Through Outcomes programme. And as part of that, they funded St Mungo's, a large homelessness charity in London, to commission the creation of an outcomes monitoring tool. The three of us won the contract to develop that tool. And through that piece of work, the prototype of what we now call the outcome star was born. Then after that, under the auspices of the Impact Through Outcomes programme, we were engaged to create tools for a number of other homeless agencies in London. We worked with the Single Homeless Project, with Broadway, Thames Reach and the Passage Day Centre. In every case, the STAR tool somehow just seemed to be like the right approach. And each time we recreated it, we learned and we improved it. Then we created another similar tool for Rochdale Borough Council, this time for a wider range of services. And eventually we pulled the learning from all these projects together and created the definitive Outcomes Star, which was published by the London Housing Foundation. People loved it. not just in homelessness services. It was picked up in mental health, in drugs and alcohol services, and more widely than that as well. We got the opportunity to collaborate with the Mental Health Providers Forum to create a version specifically tailored to mental health services, and the Recovery Star was born. Then we worked with Camden Council to create a version for teenagers, the Teen Star, and then there was no stopping us. Requests came in thick and fast, and we now have 44 different versions, all responses to requests from service providers, none of them initiated by us, and all developed in close collaboration with direct services and the people they're helping. Many of them are now on their second, third, or even fourth edition as well. There are about 1,000 organisations with current licences to use the Outcome Star, and we have around 1.5 million completions on our Star Online app. And that's been about a 19-year journey from that beginning point to here. So why has it proved to be so popular? Well, on the whole, people come to the Star because they need to measure outcomes. But on the whole, they stay with the Star because they love it as a tool for enabling change. So here are some of the things that people tell us about why they like the Star. So people like the Star because it's holistic. This is the Recovery Star. And the points on the Star are all the key domains of someone's life, not just mental health, but also things like friends and community, relationships, home, identity and self-esteem. There's a scale for each one. So it doesn't just focus on the presenting problem, it looks at the whole of someone's life. And people often say they have better conversations, even if they've been working with someone for a while, when they use the Star, because they uncover important things that hadn't been talked about before. And also it highlights things that are working well, as well as areas of difficulty. So another reason why people tell us they like the Star is because it's relational. It's designed to be completed by the helper and the person being helped together. The reading is the result of a conversation. We call it collaborative completion as opposed to self-completion or expert completion. These both have their place, but they don't build the relationship between the helper and the person or give rise to a shared perspective. And these are essential foundations for working well together. Another reason people like it is because it's a developmental tool. Rather than measuring the severity of the problem, it focuses on the person's relationship with the issue. And I'm just going to take a bit of time to explain how that works. All versions of the Outcome Star are underpinned by a model of change that we call the journey of change. Here on the slide, you can see the version that's used in the Recovery Star. You can apply this journey to almost anything that involves building new capabilities and changing behaviour, giving up smoking, building a better relationship with someone important to you, or managing a health condition such as anxiety. I'm going to use an example that many of us can probably relate to, which is eating a healthier diet. So at the bottom of the journey, at the first stage, you don't recognise that your poor diet is having a negative impact. Your focus is on other things. Things are stuck because there's no opening for change or help. Then perhaps a health problem arises. You seek help. You're looking for someone to fix the problem, a diagnosis and a treatment someone can give you. Now you're at the accepting help stage, but at this stage, you're not thinking about personal change. But then it becomes clear that there isn't a simple answer, and you're going to have to look more broadly at your lifestyle and particularly your diet. Maybe you're a bit daunted, but also encouraged that there's something that you can do to improve your health. You're now believing that change is possible and trying to make it happen, the third stage. But at this point, you don't know what works. You try different things, but you can get discouraged. It's too much work and you don't have the time, or you don't like the new food you're trying. But if you have support to keep going, then eventually you start to find some things that do work for you. You find foods you like that are also healthy. You find ways to fit cooking into your routine, and you find things that are easy for you to prepare. So now you're at the fourth stage, learning what works. But when life's difficult and there's too much to do, you can easily slip back into your old ways, So you still benefit from having a bit of support in place. Finally, you reach the top of the journey. Your new diet becomes part of your normal routine. You don't need support to keep going. You're self-reliant. So if we just move to the next slide. So the journey that underpins the scale, so that journey then underpins the scale descriptions, which define what each point on each scale mean. These are set out in the Outcome Star user guide, and you can see a couple of extracts from the user guide here. There's the long scale descriptions, such as the ones on the left, and the shorter ones, such as the one on the right. What people like about the journey of change is that it breaks change down into manageable steps. It shows that change is possible, and it shows what the next step is. So the measuring actually helps with the changing. Another thing that people like is that it supports reflection and a flexible, person-centered approach. The helper and the person being helped talk about each outcome area in turn, and using the journey of change and the scales in the user guide, they come up with a shared reading, which is then plotted on the star, as you can see here. They can look at the whole picture and use it to reflect and ask questions. For the person, it can help them explore with their worker, what are my priorities? What's holding me back? What's helped me to make progress so far? And how can I apply that to other areas where I'm still struggling? And for the worker, it can help them explore with their manager things like, what kind of key work approach is needed with this person at this point in time? For example, if the person is at the accepting help stage, then the worker will need to drive things, maybe setting up appointments and perhaps even accompanying them to the appointment. But if the person is at the learning what works stage, then the worker needs to step back. Their role now is to give encouragement and support reflection and learning. If they continue to lead things too much, they could actually hold the person back. So if we move to the next slide. Oh, actually, I think we've missed a slide. Yeah, that's it. It was, yeah, so what we've got now is just a picture of the star completed twice. So having followed through on the actions that they agreed the first time they completed the star, the work and the person they're helping complete the star together for a second time and get an instant picture of what's changed, which can be incredibly motivating for both of them. We often hear stories of people putting the star on their fridge. They're proud of their journey, and it's great to have a piece of paper that says you're doing well. So finally, people love the star because it measures what matters. People value the star most of all for the benefits for the people completing it. They value the overview that it gives to the worker and the person they're helping and the sense of forward momentum. But the data generated when you aggregate the readings across a service or a group of services also has value for managers and commissioners. So here's a report that services and commissioners can use to reflect on the needs people have when they join the service. They might ask, what are the outcome areas where people have the greatest needs? And how well equipped are we to meet those needs? And if we move to another graphic. This is a report that summarises change. So here they might ask, where are people making the most or the least progress, and why is that? And are there successes in some projects that can be replicated in others, or barriers that we need to overcome? Star data won't tell you everything, but it's a helpful complement to other forms of intelligence. People don't always use their data in this way, which I'll say more about later. But when they do, what they value is that it reflects the reality of ground level work and looks at the nuances and steps along the way. It strikes a balance between two extremes. At the one end of the spectrum, there's the extreme of it specifying exactly what the outcome should be. For example, a commissioner might say that the outcome they want the service to achieve is to get everybody into a job and working at least 30 hours a week. The problem with this approach is that it doesn't take into account what is the right thing for that person at that time. Perhaps learning to manage their anxiety is the priority and would provide a much firmer foundation for improvements in other areas later down the line. And being driven into a job without addressing their anxiety could just set the person up to fail. But at the other end of the spectrum, there's the extreme of leaving the specification of the outcome to the person. One person might say their priority is to find and keep a permanent home. Another says it's to grow in confidence. Another says it's to continue their harmful drinking, but in a warm and safe environment. How do we ever get an overview when the outcomes are so different? And how do we hold a vision of the person's potential to flourish when they themselves have given up on that? The STAR attempts to find a helpful middle ground between these two extremes. The outcome domains are specified on the basis of extensive consultation and piloting, and what good looks like is described, but in terms that allows lots of room for individual difference and preferences. For example, in the recovery STAR, the end point of the scale for friends and community is, I have the friends and social connections that are right for me. So I'm just going to pause the sharing. So with the outcome STAR being so popular and meeting so many different needs, at this point in our journey, we were feeling rather pleased with ourselves. We created a website and made the stars that we had developed at that point, which I think was around 8 different stars, available as free downloads for people to pick up and use as they wished. We offered training if people wanted, but it was optional. Job done, we thought. But it turned out that we were wrong. The job was not done. And in fact, the job was only just begun. We started hearing stories of the STAR being used as a tick box tool, something to keep the commissioners happy and tick the outcomes box, rather than as a tool for supporting learning and service development. And we heard that sometimes it wasn't completed collaboratively, and sometimes it was used as just a simple 1 to 10 scale without the user guide and the clarity of the underlying journey of change. Just another piece of paperwork to get through. Our star-shaped developmental tool was being squeezed into a tick box reporting hole. So after quite a bit of thought and consideration, we completely changed our way of working. We made training mandatory, we charged a license fee to access the tool, and we invested in a network of implementation leads to support the use of the STAR. So now we were really engaged in the realities of day-to-day service delivery through training key workers to use the STAR and through supporting managers, leaders and commissioners to implement it in their services. But the more we engaged in the messy business of training and supporting organisations, the more it became apparent that there were real barriers to using it in the way we intended. First of all, we found that staff working directly with people were sometimes not trained or supported to work in a relational, flexible way. Another thing we found was that managers could be so caught up in managing procedures and fulfilling reporting requirements that they just didn't have time to support the actual delivery of help. And we found that commissioners were often so focused on targets that they didn't have time or didn't really even see it as being within their scope to learn from data and to use it to identify barriers and improve services. So even with training and implementation support in place, it can feel like we're pushing a boulder up a hill. We're training people to work in a relational developmental, to work with a relational developmental tool and to use data for reflection and learning, but it's often being used in a context that really doesn't support that. So if we go back to the slides now. Why is this so hard? That was the question for me. And it led me to lots of conversations, lots of reading, attending events, and ultimately to a thesis set out in the Enabling Help report, which was published by Triangle last year. The core argument in the report is also my heresy, that social provision is being driven by ideas borrowed from other disciplines. They don't fit in the world of social provision, where people are dealing with complex and ongoing challenges. And so they result in us focusing on the wrong things. And ultimately, they can make it harder for people receiving services to get what they need. My take is that there are 4 different paradigms that are shaping thinking and therefore behaviour in the social sector today. First of all, there's the medical paradigm, ideas borrowed from medicine. The core assumption here is that the person seeking help is sick or flawed in some way, and the helper has the expertise to treat and perhaps cure them. This paradigm puts the focus on the helper and their expertise rather than the person. It doesn't fit in the world of social provision because people facing complex and ongoing challenges can't be fixed from the outside. Success means them playing an active part in the process. The help must be a true collaboration that takes into account their perspective, their priorities, their strengths. So next, we have the bureaucratic paradigm. Here, the core assumption is that fairness, accountability, and the management of risk are best served through an impersonal system that provides a standard service delivered in the same way to everyone. This paradigm puts the focus on the organisation providing the service and their rules and procedures rather than the person. It doesn't fit in the world of social provision because people need services that flex to them and their particular circumstances and needs, not something standardised. And they need human services. It isn't just what's delivered, but how it's delivered that matters. Kindness and compassion are key active ingredients in the service mix. And when there's no sense of a human relationship, people don't feel able to trust, and it's hard to get anywhere without that. Next, there's the market paradigm, ideas borrowed from economics. The core assumption here is that effectiveness and efficiency are best achieved through competition and economic incentives. This paradigm puts the focus on the commissioner rather than the person being helped. It doesn't fit in the world of social provision for an awful lot of reasons, many of which have been well articulated by others. So I'm just going to focus on 3. First of all, it assumes that providers are in control of results, whereas in fact, outcomes are the result of many factors, not all of them in the provider's control. Secondly, it's based on the idea that positive outcomes can be specified independent of context, but an outcome like keeping a child out of care is positive in one context if the home environment is now safe, but negative if the home environment is not safe. Thirdly, it assumes that scrutinising services on the basis of outcomes achieved improves effectiveness and efficiency. But the act of measuring outcomes does not on its own improve outcomes. It's using outcomes for learning and service development that does that. And our experience is that when organisations have to measure for reporting, they see outcomes as something they do to keep their funding. And it's quite hard to get them to engage with outcomes as a tool for learning and service improvement. So finally, we have the natural sciences paradigm, which borrows from the approaches used in subjects like physics and chemistry. It assumes that what works can be specified independent of context. The idea is that if I do X, an intervention, to Y, a person with a particular kind of problem, the result will be Z, an outcome. This paradigm puts the focus on the intervention rather than the person. It doesn't fit in social provision because there are more factors impacting on what works than we can control for. Perhaps it was the particular type of intervention that resulted in a positive outcome, but perhaps it was the commitment and humanity with which the intervention was delivered, or it was the way the service was coordinated with other services. So this table draws the 4 different paradigms together. I'll just give you a moment to have a look at it. and take it in yourself. So the point I'm making is that these paradigms do not fit in the world of social provision, but also we don't actually need to borrow from other disciplines because there's a wealth of knowledge out there about what works, drawn from the human sciences. And so what works when helping people who are facing chronic and ongoing challenges is help that is relational, built on trusting, empathic and reliable relationships. It's help that is motivational, building hope, focusing on strengths and achievements and developing a sense of personal agency. It's help that is developmental, building skills and capacities and providing opportunities to learn. It's help that's flexible, tailored to each particular person, their capacity, their preferences, what matters to them. It's help that's holistic, looking at the whole picture and joining the dots, not just the presenting problem. And it's help that's contextual, by which I mean help that recognises the impact of poverty, discrimination, trauma, and lack of opportunity. In the report, I've called this enabling help. So if we go back to the iceberg slide. So here's my central proposition. Outcomes are achieved through direct work with people, through providing help that's relational, developmental, flexible and holistic. They're not achieved through contracts, even if they're outcomes based. They're not delivered by research. They're not delivered by record keeping and outcome monitoring systems. They're not delivered by presentations like this. All these things can help, but only if they support this kind of collaborative enabling work with people. If they make it more difficult or take attention or resources away from it unnecessarily, then they're part of the problem rather than part of the solution. The job of everyone in the service delivery system who's not providing direct services is to make enabling help possible. Their job is enabling help. So what does that look like? Well, an enabling approach to management, just let us get to the right place. Yes, an enabling approach to management means focusing on facilitating the delivery of effective services on the ground. Of course, we still need rules, reporting and procedures, but these shouldn't be the focus. And an enabling approach to commissioning means focusing on shared values and goals, building strong collaborative relationships with service providers and supporting collaboration between providers too. It still means holding service providers to account, but it's more productive to hold them to account for learning than it is to hold them to account for achieving a particular target. And finally, an enabling approach to policy making and research means asking, how can we create responsive learning service delivery systems that consistently deliver enabling help, rather than trying to find a particular intervention formula that always works. So we pause the presentation again at this point. Oh, actually, Anna, you could just leave that slide up, I think. So I don't want to imply that working in this way is easy. There are no magic bullets, and it takes time, vision, and persistence to create an enabling service delivery system. It's more like tending a garden than lighting a firework. It's slow, patient work, but over time the effort is rewarded with service delivery systems that really do make a difference. Many people do work in this way, or try to, but because it isn't easy to quantify or codify, it can be invisible and it can be taken for granted or crushed by more conspicuous but shorter term approaches. That's why it's so important to name it, to make it visible and to value it. The STAR can help to make this kind of approach visible. Used well, it codifies things enough to point people in the right direction, but not so much as to take away the human element. But to reach its full potential, the STAR needs to be implemented in a context that is informed by the right mental models, what we know about human beings and what they need to thrive, rather than a context in which the way things are done are driven by ideas borrowed from other disciplines, ideas that don't fit and that can result in unhelpful approaches. So as you can see here, it isn't just us. We're not the only people saying this. And on the slide, you can see some other bodies and authors who have a very similar message. But without the change that we and these other organisations and individuals are calling for, we'll continue trying to squeeze a star-shaped tool into a tick box shaped hole. You can do it, but it hurts.